Hey, welcome to Rominger Radio, 717-916-5189. This is Carl Rominger. I'll be your host, 717-916-5189. Tonight we're going to talk about corporate personhood. And what on earth am I talking about with corporate personhood? Well, I guess I have a lot of stuff to talk about, but what I'm talking about with corporate personhood is this idea that corporations are persons. And the United States Supreme Court, in deciding the Hobby Lobby case just a day or two ago, came out with an important decision which a lot of religious conservatives and people who believe that the religious, firmly held religious beliefs of individuals should be recognized and given some accommodation against public laws. We're very happy with the result. And I think generally most of us should be happy with the result of the case. Part of the problem, though, is how we got there. What do I mean by that? How did we get there? Well, the Supreme Court held that a for-profit corporation is, in fact, entitled to protections of free association, and more importantly, to the statutory protection that Congress gave, not just the First Amendment, but Congress gave in the Religious Restoration Act or some such thing. Anyhow, let me back up here. Remember a long time ago, let's give some history, put some context on this. A long time ago, some individuals got in trouble for smoking peyote, and they said, wait a minute, you can't kick us out of our church or otherwise punish us for smoking peyote because that's a well-held religious belief. And the United States Supreme Court said, no, the First Amendment doesn't protect right of religious freedom, doesn't trump in this particular case. So Congress, in reaction to that case from the United States Supreme Court, held that going forward, they expected the courts to give more respect to religious beliefs. And then some cases came out, and the Supreme Court said, well, this is this First Amendment analysis, and so we're still going to apply the First Amendment analysis. And in response to that, the court said, or the Congress said, okay, well, wait a minute. No, we meant the First Amendment, and we meant anything else that would unreasonably burden religion and went beyond a First Amendment analysis. So the Hobby Lobby case is not a First Amendment religious case. And when the ACA was passed, there's nothing in it that says that it's exempt or that agency actions under it are exempt from the religious protections Congress had previously given. Because they could have done that. They could have just simply said in there that this act will not be subject to nor controlled by any of our prior acts of Congress, or will, to the extent necessary, supersede any prior act of Congress, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not in there. And more importantly, these were agency regulations. The Supreme Court accurately notes that they left it up to the Department of Health and Human Services to determine what the exact regulations would be. And as a result, these were not legislative acts being challenged. These were administrative acts being challenged under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, as it amended the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. So, anyhow, as a result, those prior statutory laws of Congress were violated. Now, one of the important things the Supreme Court pointed out was, actually, we're not really saying much of a distinction here because the rules themselves said that not-for-profit and religious corporations were entitled to exemptions from the ACA requirement of carrying birth control and other religious portions. So I don't get into the weeds here, to quote another radio host that we all used to listen to. But basically, Supreme Court decision is not fundamentally altering the interpretation of the First Amendment. It's a statutory interpretation of the interplay of the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act as amended by the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act of 2000. And so, and how it interplays with governmental regulation as allowed by Congress under the ACA by the federal government's bureaucrats. So it's not a fundamentally striking opinion in any way. It really isn't. It really hasn't changed the constitutional analysis whatsoever. In fact, it gives more protection than the Constitution because, as Congress can do, they did, under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and as amended by the Relipula, they did what they did. So they gave a little more percent. So nothing great really comes out of the Hobby Lobby solution except that people like the result. But from a lawyer's standpoint, I don't think it's very instructive. What it is instructive on, and what's more interesting, is the Supreme Court of the United States said, hey, under this law, and for all intents and purposes, under our analysis, corporations are persons too. And they're entitled to religious protection in organization. One of the things that the United States government argued against it, which I thought was pertinent, is that this is a decision designed, or a law rather, designed to protect the receivers of medical benefits, and as a result, it was somewhat unfair of a decision to say that business organizations could somehow become religiously protected, and warned about, the for-profit companies, and warned about what about other arguments down the road. I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I don't believe in transfusions. Why should I be forced to pay for transfusions? I am a really wacky backwoods preacher, and I don't believe that blacks and whites should marry. So why should my wedding photography business be required to service mixed race or gay marriage? And of course, the Supreme Court said, oh, no, this decision really doesn't go beyond this very narrow window. But that's really not exactly what they said. In fact, when you read a Supreme Court decision, because I've been reading this one, you read the syllabus first, and the syllabus is sort of an explanation that says, here's what happened in the case. And it's not law, and you can't cite the syllabus for a proposition. It's what the justices write that count, but the syllabus is a great encapsulation of the decision that you can read. So I strongly encourage, if you're not going to read the whole decision, and you don't need to read the whole decision, just look it up. Go to the Supreme Court's website. It's like supremecourt.gov. Click on the Hobby Lobby decision and read the syllabus quickly, or slowly, however you want to read it, and get it in your head. In the opinion written by Alito, he says, in holding that the HHS, Housing Human Services, mandate is unlawful, we reject HHS's argument that owners of companies forfeited all RFRA protection when they decide to organize their business as a corporation rather than sole proprietorships or general partnerships. The plain term of the RFRA makes it perfectly clear that Congress did not discriminate in this way against men and women who wish to run their businesses as for-profit corporations in the manner required by their religious beliefs. Interesting. And then it goes on to say, since the RFRA applies in these cases, we must decide whether the challenged HHS regulations substantially burden the exercise of religion. And we hold that they do. The owners of the business have religious objections to abortion, and according to their religious beliefs, the four contraceptive methods at issue are abortifacients. Basically, the four contraceptives in controversy allow for an implantation not to happen, but for a fertilization to occur first. So unlike a condom that just keeps everything from getting done, their issue with this particular form is that it allows a baby to be created but not implanted. If the owners wish to comply with the HHS mandate, they believe they would be facilitating abortions, and if they do not comply, they'll pay a very heavy price, as much as $1.3 million per day, or about $475 million per year in the case of one of the companies. That's Hobby Lobby. If these consequences don't amount to a substantial burden, it's hard to see what would. It's true that it is a substantial burden. No doubt about that. And they go on in the decision to, and this is, I think, is another part that I want to read. I'm just setting you up here a little bit, I want to give you a little background information on what's going on in this case. 717-916-5189, by the way, talk line number. So if you guys have some viewpoints on the Hobby Lobby decision, or you want to call in, would love to hear from you tonight, because I think this is a great talker's topic. You can pretty much say what you want, and we can debate the merits of the ACA decision itself, and we can also talk about the merits of the underlying issues in the case involving corporate personhood. So there's a lot to work on here. 717-916-5189. If you're just joining us, this is Carl Rominger here. And, of course, we'll be on until 9 o'clock tonight, so I may wrap up a couple minutes early. It's just a beautiful night out. Of course, yesterday was my birthday, So if you want to call in and talk about my birthday, that's always fair game too. 717-916-5189. Really, it wasn't that exciting, trust me. Although I was surprised with the guys at work with a cake, which is always impressive. So anyhow, back to this important Supreme Court decision. As this description of our reasoning shows, our holding is very specific. We do not hold, as the principal dissent alleges, that for-profit corporations and other commercial enterprises can, quote, opt out of any law, saving only tax laws they judge incompatible with their sincerely held religious beliefs. That's Ginsburg's dissent. Nor do we hold that this dissent implies that such corporations have free rein to take steps that impose disadvantages on others or that require the general public to pick up the tab. And we certainly do not hold or suggest that the RFA demands accommodation of a for-profit corporation. It's religious belief, no matter what the impact that accommodation may have on thousands of women employed by Hobby Lobby. The effect of the HHS-created accommodation on women employed by Hobby Lobby and other companies involved in these cases would be precisely zero. Under that accommodation, these women will still be entitled to all FDA-approved contraceptive without cost sharing. Alito's basically trying to say, genuinely or disingenuinely, that, hey, we're really not going to change the landscape here, and we're not going to fundamentally change the way the law works, and it's just a very narrow decision. The problem is, if you actually read the case, they basically have found that a sincerely held religious belief of a for-profit corporation's owners, and they, of course, they go on and say, well, it's a closely held corporation. Well, guess what? Most people in America are employed by closely held corporations. You ever hear of a little company called Procter & Gamble? You ever hear of a little company called Archer's Daniel Midland? I could go on and on. Ever hear of a little guy that makes styrofoam cups called Dart? These are all massive corporations that are in the control of very small groups of people and thus meet the definition of closely held corporation. So don't get sidetracked believing that, well, this only affects the small mom and pop corporations. You know, if I want to open a wedding photography business and I want to incorporate to get the protection of an LLC or a corporation, and I want to have the ability to pick and choose whose weddings I do and where the moral line is drawn, or I'm a 60-person company and it's still small enough that I should still have some say in this, or just don't worry that the analysis is drawn on those lines in any way, shape, or form, because it's not. In fact, the analysis for Hobby Lobby, that's a giant corporation. You could see how much money it was going to cost them in the ACA fines. It gives you some idea of their size. What I would tell you is then focus more on the fact, and why the Supreme Court went out at great length to say, well, this is a narrow decision, because they're trying to say, well, don't worry, this won't likely lead to other things. But the logic is such that a lower court bound by this decision is going to have to balance these things out. And it's quite likely that this decision is going to come into play in the future in subsequent court decisions. I just can't believe that we wouldn't expect that to happen. So I respectfully disagree with the court's analysis that this decision is very narrowly decided. What I'm most interested in, though, is the idea of creating a corporation as a person. This happened recently when corporations were given free speech rights. Now, we know that there's been commercial free speech rights for a while. That commerce, the fact that it's a commerce issue doesn't allow Congress to regulate it more. And corporations have been given components of personhood for many years. But this is an evolution. So we have to go back up a little bit, though, and start with what is a corporation? Well, originally, and this becomes important in the Supreme Court's decision, so that's why I think it might be worth going back in time a little bit and discussing. So we'll go back to our civics class, back when we were all stuck in grade school, and we learned about the East India Tea Company, right? The idea that people could pool money together and get a corporate charter was a relatively new legal concept. And the whole idea of creating this separate entity was designed so that people's entire fortunes were not at stake, just their investment in the company. And so it became a chartered business. And so you can still buy Coleman's English mustard, right, by appointment of Her Majesty the Queen. And they're appointed to make English mustard. Well, in the really old days, corporations were created for a purpose. So, East India Tea Company was created to do commerce with India in exchange. Traditional corporate charters would be very specific. I would like to have a lumber mill, and I would like to be a corporation. Okay. Well, it's Carl Rominger's Lumber Mill Tree Corporation, and its power is to cut trees and sell logs. And I couldn't then, for instance, just decide to start building homes or carry on other lines of business because I wasn't allowed to. That would be considered ultra vires or in the outside the scope of the corporation's charter. And long and short of it is that narrow scope meant that the corporation could only do certain things and only had certain powers. Now corporations get a general business charter from the state, and so it's for any lawful purpose in commerce or for any lawful purpose for that matter for conducting business. So corporations have very broad charters, and so the Congress has allowed this to happen. The states have allowed this to happen under state law. And the Supreme Court found that that was instrumental in their decision, the idea that corporations are now chartered for very broad purposes. In other words, since a corporation is not this narrowly construed entity anymore, only for specific purposes, the owners in associating in it, and that's where this comes from, by the way, the idea that you contain some kind of right of free association and some kind of right to continue to express yourself even if you've chosen a corporate format. It's a little bit problematic because these are arbitrary lines. Let's go back to, again, what if I just simply say I want to discriminate and I have a religious reason to do so? There are lots of sincerely held religious beliefs that run afoul of various laws. Where do you draw the line? And that just becomes the big issue. So, I don't know. I'm most worried, though, the idea that corporations continue to gain additional rights. Where do corporations compete with human beings? Well, corporations can last for hundreds, even thousands of years. Theoretically, they could last forever. They don't have an expiration. As long as they are profitable or as long as they are maintained. So a corporation could be non-profitable but somehow maintained by either money in reserve or a benefactor of some sort or other corporations. But generally, they're going to be, for-profit corporations, going to be moving money through them and creating some level of wealth. But a corporation can just sit around and think really, really, really long term. And so corporations, while they're at the behest of their owners, aren't really necessarily controlled exactly by their owners, or at least won't always be controlled by their owners and can move forward in space and in time in a way that a human being can't, which means they can play games on a much longer basis than you or I can. I can't wait 85 years to get something done. They can wait 150 or 200 years to get something done. Now, there's advantages to that. The fact that an institution can exist beyond the scope of one human life and can utilize the resources of many people traditionally would be the function of a government, or traditionally would be the function of some other large organization like a church or a university. Corporations now, think of pharmaceutical companies, they bring together thousands of scientists and put them to work on solving problems and creating products and doing all the things that they need to do to be profitable and to continue to grow and produce money and then plow it into research and investment. But they create an institution where, one man could spend 40 years doing research for the corporation on some drug that never makes it to market. But that's still a contribution to the corporation, and the corporation is still a viable living entity, even though that individual's donation to the matter did not go very far, because the corporation will outlast the individual. And so now let's go ahead and say that corporations are essentially legally the same as people. We've now created super people. We've created people who will continue to exist beyond us. We've created people who can think in time frames beyond us. And we can think of people who are divorced from the needs of normal human existence when it comes to food and water and shelter and those sorts of things. I don't know. Do we want to be competing in a legal environment where you and I have no more rights than, or have the same rights as, companies and corporations who will go on forever? Is that normal? Is that where we want to be? Is that a great place to be? I don't know. I don't know. But I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that is a serious issue. Let's talk about some issues with corporate personhood. You know, corporations, ultimate chameleons. And while the Hobby Lobby case talks about corporations wanting to exist to voice their owners' sincerely held religious beliefs, corporations can very quickly change to match any political or legal environment that's out there. And so the corporations in Nazi Germany dutifully supported the Reich, accepted slave labor, and did all the things that a human being might have found repugnant, of course, which many didn't. But again, there's no great moral advantage to a corporation. In fact, if anything, it's probably more amoral. So why do we want to give them all the rights and assemblages of personhood? And as they've clawed out more of them, and the courts have given them more over the years, this goes all the way back to the way the 14th Amendment was used against the little guy initially by the Supreme Court years and years ago. Remember, the 14th Amendment, which was originally designed to ensure that the slaves weren't mistreated as they became free peoples, was then eventually turned around and used through a series of decisions to beat up on labor unions and all kinds of the little man, because the 14th Amendment was found to impart some rights into corporations. Well, since that, we've now got corporations with First Amendment rights. We've got free association rights. We've got all these things going on. And the corporations have gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And they now, as we know, can give corporate finance money and give freely in the next election cycle here. And we're going to see this en masse. They can spend on issues and things like that. We're going to see them flex even more muscle. So I doubt you're going to see a political solution from Congress or the president. Nobody's going to take on corporate America head on, or corporations in general head on, in that avenue. So our elected politicians are going to continue to be beholden to corporate interests and not reverse any of these trends. Our court has sort of worked itself into a legal model where corporations are being given routinely personhood. And I saw another lawyer or a lawyer comment on one of my Facebook posts saying that he felt that this is insane, that if you don't eat, breathe, sleep, and poop, I think was his quote, then what the hell are you be giving all the rights of a person? It's a legal fiction. We're going to have trusts and other legal entities that are fictional people. And as corporations grow in this power, they're not going to give it up. Courts are unlikely to push the trend. And the corporations have the money to do the targeted lawsuits. They're going to continue to push these issues. So the Hobby Lobby becomes an interesting case. It's a case that's being celebrated by many people, right? Many people are thrilled to death about Hobby Lobby. Many other people are upset by the decision. But what happened in this decision in the background is corporations once again scored a point for corporate personhood. And remember I told you they operate on a different time frame than we do. They don't have to win one case every year for 40 years. They need to win one case every 10 years for 400 years, okay? That's all. That's how they're going to get there. And if, in fact, they control the influence in the Congress, corporations will become super persons who have superpowers in a democracy. It's a problem. I really think it is. I know somebody posted on Facebook, well, I don't have any problem with corporate personhood. And I like the guy, and he's a funny guy. And I know he's being a little facetious, but corporate personhood is problematic. Your most corporations are not literally under the thumb of one founder or one controller. And those that are, well, that's just a wealthy guy, right? Or gal. they're just going to act the same way wealthy people have always acted. They're going to have the power and influence to peddle their money, and equality amongst citizens and political power and things like that are discussion for a different day. So the downside in those cases, very little, right? Hey, this guy owns $1 billion corporation. Well, if he was in a corporation or in his pocket, it doesn't matter. He's going to wield influence, power, and do things as he may. But when he dies, his wealth goes somewhere. And his wealth is in the corporation. The corporation comes under control of somebody else. Again, the corporation just has to survive that person to go on and survive each person, and the corporation has a lineal movement forward in time where it does what it wants. They become beasts unto themselves. And notice I said beast. Maybe that is the mark of the beast, the rise of the corporate citizen, right? Maybe taking on a corporate entity is the mark of the beast. How ironic would that be for the Hobby Lobby guys? Nonetheless, what you're seeing is these entities rise who will last forever, will move forward and do what they want to do with their wealth and their power in time frames that are well outside the scope of human life. And that's what I'm getting at. Corporate personhood. And I've said that this is going to be one of the greatest. 100 years from now, they're going to look back and they're going to talk about this era in the law. And when I say this era, they're going to talk about the last 100 years or so and say, look at how the world has struggled, or how American legal system at least has struggled with what is a corporation? How powerful is it? How many rights does it have? Is it a constitutional citizen? Is it a citizen of the country in and of itself? Maybe a non-voting citizen. But be damn sure that the corporations are going to protect themselves. Protect themselves at all aspects. So if you're just joining, 717-916-5189, would love to get you guys to call in. 717-916-5189. I want to hear what you guys think. Am I crazy? Should we be worried about corporate personhood, or is corporate personhood no big deal? Is this another one of Carl's got some bug up his butt? He's making no sense like usual. You tell me. I also would like to say that having the court decide these kinds of issues, knowing that there's no likely political recourse, may require us to think in the future more about what judges we appoint and how they're going to decide on these issues. Because this corporate personhood kind of rises up and comes forward to us in a series of cases that aren't necessarily linear. And we don't look at them and go, oh, these are corporate personhood cases. But each one is a little chink in the armor, or a little brick in this wall of corporate personhood that's being created. And call me paranoid, but I don't think we're going to have to worry about ET taking over, and we're not going to have to worry about AI, artificial intelligence, taking over. We're going to have to worry about social structures being unfairly influenced by super citizens who can think on timescales that are beyond your or I's life expectancy, and who can flex power and muscle over political entities over centuries rather than years and decades like a human being is limited to. So think long and hard about that. We have corporations that have been around for a very long time. We have insurance companies that go way back. We have many companies that operate today that have great series of histories, but what's keeping them, what makes them different than us? What makes them not quite as powerful? Before we used to not let them give money just wholesale to finance political campaigns. Before we used to say that, there's some regulation that applies to you and you can't just assert the First Amendment. It used to say, the court used to say, for instance, that the First Amendment was trumped by the Commerce Clause, and that to the extent Congress could regulate commerce, they could regulate corporate speech on commercial matters. And it's been held, what's the other decision? Just between Coca-Cola with the pomegranate juice, that whether it wasn't a pro or anti-corporation, but again, that's about what kind of speech we can have from corporate entities or business entities. So that was a little more generic. But still, there's all this going on where the corporations are gaining. So it was 44 Liquor Mart versus Rhode Island. 44 Liquor Mart was in Rhode Island. And they would take and place ads, I think, in Delaware in the newspaper, their advertising price of their liquor to get people to drive over and buy liquor. Well, Rhode Island did not allow you to place advertisements for liquor. But, of course, they placed them in the neighboring state's newspaper and said, hey, we're advertising to these people over in Delaware. The fact that some of the people in Rhode Island find out about our prices through these ads say, too bad, so sad. And really, you can't do anything about it because, you know, this is interstate commerce and this regulation shouldn't apply. And Rhode Island said, no, the Constitution protections of the First Amendment don't apply in this situation to a company like yours. Well, the Supreme Court reversed and said, no, that's not the way it works. And there's a lot more legal logic to that. But again, it's another one of these little cases where corporations got a little more rights than they had before. And so it's a ratchet. It only goes in one direction. You know, Obama made that terrible faux pas where he called out the Supreme Court in public. Remember that? I mean, that was terrible. He should not have done that about the decision on campaign finance a few years ago. But I'll grant him this. I think he sees where this is headed and has concerns about it. And I know you guys don't like to agree with Obama, or at least some of you don't. I try to use it as my litmus test, too. If I agree with Obama on something, I have to kind of rethink it and make sure. But it doesn't mean it's always the wrong decision. I don't think his version may be as nuanced as others, but I think he understood the problem. The problem is this flood of corporate money. It already erodes and corrodes true representative democracy. They already have a disproportionate influence because we know that money does buy influence and access to the political system. And now, as we give them more and more rights and standing to bring various actions, we invite ourselves to live in a world where the corporate citizen is the super citizen who supersedes you and I. And there's a great sci-fi series, I probably talked about it before, Continuum out of Canada, it's now on Sci-Fi Station, but involves a woman from the future who comes back because she chases some terrorists back in time who are trying to end what's called the corporate Congress because the world has basically been taken over by a consortium of corporations who now run the world. And really, there's no more powerful enemy than an immortal enemy. And so, why would corporations have the best interest of people in mind in the long run? They're different than us. They're not us. They may be closely held. They may not be. But their ultimate interests and goals are not exactly the same. So it's the same way that 85% of all police officers are pro-gun, big Second Amendment guys, but 85% of police organizations take anti-gun stances because large organizations or entities are different than their constituent parts, and the conclusions they reach, the decisions they make, and the morals they ultimately will espouse over time are not those of their founders. It's not those of their individual members. It's what's best for them collectively. Okay? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I don't know. I guess a lot of people seem to be upset about this Christian. Christian, call in here, 717-916-5189 if you want to. So did feminists not have sex until Obamacare? Yeah, I mean, the Hobby Lobby decision really seems to be much ado about nothing, right? I mean, why is there free birth control? Free birth control is actually a governmental mandate put into the ACA. And idea of reproductive health and these sorts of things being mandatory must take care of minimal coverage. If you don't, and I just happened to work these numbers over the other day, if you want to carry the absolute bare minimum, okay, absolute bare minimum you have to carry on an employee. I mean, absolute bare minimum, $50 a month, $60 a month, you can get a plan for, okay? Do the math on that. $60 a month is $700 a year, give or take. Well, the government's going to charge you $2,000 if you don't get that coverage. Okay, so you're going to save $1,400 by getting that coverage over what you're going to be fined at the end of the year. However, that bare minimum coverage doesn't qualify for the second potential problem. And so unless you go to the second level of coverage, any employee who leaves, but who goes out on an exchange and buys through an exchange triggers an additional $3,000 penalty per employee who uses the exchange. Okay? So anybody who uses the exchange, it triggers the $2,000 across everybody. There's a $3,000 penalty for each person who actually enrolls on the exchange if you don't have the second level of coverage. The second level of coverage is going to cost you about another $60 a month. So now you're at about $120 a month per employee, maybe a little bit more, depending on your size, because this is assuming you have maybe 150 employees. If you only have 53 and you fall under the mandate, it's not going to be as cheap per employee. But now let's just say we're at $120 an employee, right? Well, that's $1,200 a year plus another $240. So it's about $1,500 a year for the absolute bare minimum coverage that a company has to pay. That's a lot of money to mandate a company to pay per employee for the rights of hiring. Now, and actually this is a good tie-in to the ACA here. If you hire more than 50 people, those potential fines belong to you. However, employees who work less than 30 hours a week, and the actual test is going to be on average, so they're going to use a 1 month average. They use their monthly average, and if they exceed 120 hours in a month, which is a 4-week month basically. So in a 4-week period, if the employee exceeds 120 hours, then they need to have coverage available or else you're going to trigger these events. If they don't, then you don't. So here's what happens. If I am a large corporation, and when I say large corporation, if I am a McDonald's, let's say, I can avoid, of course, they got exempted from the ACA, so it's not really a fair comparison, right? Somehow they managed to do that. Oh, I got a caller. Look at that. 717-916-5189. Caller, you're on the air.
How you doing, Carl? Dwayne from E-Town.
Hey, Dwayne, how are you?
Oh, living the dream. So, hey, you're on the subject corporations tonight. I got a little story. Try to keep it quick.
Yeah.
Last Thursday evening, I'm a Comcast customer. You know, I do everything through Comcast. And Thursday night, lost my internet. Started calling on the phone. The bottom line is, I finally got my internet back Sunday afternoon. After probably 6, 7, 8 phone calls to Comcast, probably a total of 3-4 hours on the phone with them, and every time you call them, you get a different answer, or you don't get any at all. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you take a guy like me that has telephone and cable TV and internet access. What choices do I really have? And I guess the point I'm trying to make is you could almost call their service a monopoly.
Right.
In some stretch. And now I don't know if I'm a little older than you are, and I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day when cell phones were coming to be,
yep,
we had a company called United Telespectrum, and we had a company called Cellular One. And I remember in my area, and I forget who came first, but in my area, the one company was not allowed to sell service in your area until there was a minimum of 2 different providers. And when the second provider came on board, then the providers could sell their service. Somewhere along the line, we've lost this.
Well, there's always a tension. There's always a tension between monopolies and efficiencies because theoretically, if you have lots of competitors, they drive prices down.
Correct.
On the other hand, lots of competitors drive prices down, then people cannibalize funds to try to just stay above water, and they don't have the money to put into robust networks and new technology and this sort of thing. So a lot of markets are probably well served by at least a couple big players who can always compete against each other but also have the resources to do the research and development and the heavy lifting that can make a product better in the long run. But when you only have a few big players, there's the danger of collusion between them. And then when you only have one player and you have a monopoly, you usually end up with a regulated monopoly in the utility business, for instance, because there's a power plant and they're going to make electricity, and there's no restraint on them except the Public Utility Commission telling them what they can and can't charge for their tariffs. And then there's all kinds of zany ways that creates an inefficiency. So, for instance, if I'm a publicly regulated monopoly, the standard seems to be, am I making a fair amount of money? This creeping word of fairness. And so then we use this magic artificial standard. And so, well, how do I make more money when I'm only allowed to make so much of a percentage profit? I just have to run the whole cost of the whole ship up, right? So regulated monopolies tend to be very inefficient because they're intentionally trying to make everything more expensive, right? So they can justify if the PUC is going to say, hey, Rominger, you can only make 10% on your business, well, then I better have a $100 million business, not a $90 million business, right? Well,
right.
Well, why stop there? Why not make it a $150 million business and say, hey, I'm still only taking 10%. I just need to charge more because, well, we pay the linemen $85,000 a year, and we buy new trucks all the time, and we have an equipment room where we let everything lay out and openly let people take the stuff without any requirement that they sign it back in because we want the supplies to disappear. That's a reality of how some utilities used to run their operations, and some probably still do.
And that came up on a prior show about taxi cab companies.
Right.
You were talking about the same thing.
Right, and they have some incentive to be inefficient. Now, take this back to health insurance, and you talk about
oh my God, oh my God.
You talk about choices, and I do like when people say stuff like, "Wow, if you don't like what the company does, don't work there." And again, that's not so simple. Last I checked, jobs are not just falling off of trees. It's true that there are some jobs available that people aren't taking. And it's true that if you really need work, you can find it, and you have to just be willing to. But you can't just go, well, I don't like this company. I don't like this company's benefits package because I don't think they're not covering contraceptive, or they are, or whatever. So I'm just going to quit and go work somewhere else. There's something that when people say stupid stuff like that, and I call it stupid stuff, it sounds good, but here's the practical effect. So I drive truck for a company, and I'm looking for a better paying job. But all the new companies are telling me I got to be there at least 90 days before I can get benefits, right? So now I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to have to Cobra out and pay for Cobra. Or worse, I got laid off. And now I'm trying to find a job, and everybody's saying I'm going to have to wait to pick up the benefits. But I got another job that doesn't really pay what I want, and it's not in the location I want, but they'll pick up my benefits right away. Well, you don't make these decisions. You don't get to sit around and go, I want to work for company A because I think it's the perfect situation for me. You work for whatever company's available that can make it work for you at the moment. And who can, but then balance it out with long-term process. Anyhow, I'm digressing, but I'm just trying to point out when people say like, well, if you don't like the way it is, just change jobs. I want to be like, okay, so I guess that's what you've done, or you've tried that, or you think it's that easy that you can just jump ship and wake up in a better situation. And when that goes back to what I think you were saying, which is, there isn't always choice. There's, okay, I'm tired of the cable company. I'm so friggin' mad at the cable company. Comcast charges too much. I'm getting rid of them. Well, every time somebody says that, what happens? Well, I'm going to go to the internet. I'm just going to use the internet. Great. Well, what are you using for your internet connection? Guess what? You only have two choices. You got Sprint and Comcast, or your local phone company and Comcast, and maybe Dish. So now you're down to three choices. And guess what? When you start doing the math, magically, no matter which route you go, none of them turn out to be a great deal because they all know they can squeeze you because you don't really practically have anywhere to go. It's the same thing in the job market. You have choices, but you don't have great choices, and you don't have instant flexibility. And the other thing, if you ever noticed, these guys like to sign you into these multi-year contracts and do other things that create situations where, oh, wait, okay, if I drop my service now, I'm going to get hit with a $200 disconnect fee or some, and you're like, how the hell did I agree to that? And they're like, well, remember when we signed you up and we gave you the first 3 months free? Well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Didn't your uncle ever tell you that as a kid? Well, here's the back end of the contract and what you agreed to. You took the 3 months free, so be ready to pay the bonus money to get out, which magically looks like your first 3 months free, by the way.
Right. It's just at my place of business. Years ago, I was with the phone company with phone and internet. And I have multiple phone lines, the whole deal. And everything was working good. And the Comcast guy comes in one day and, blows a bunch of smoke up my butt. And, oh, man, I can save you so much money and blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out I went ahead and did the switch. Basically, I would say that some of the services aren't as good. Some are a little better. I mean, everything's a trade-off in life. I'd say the phones were better when I was with the phone company, but the internet's better with Comcast.
Right.
But the bottom line is, the price I was quoting, yeah, that's what I was charged, but then you added all the other stupid little hidden fees in on top of the bill that nobody ever questions, it's the same money. Until I'm past my, my 90-day, whatever they call it, the special 90-day fee, and, till you're in this thing 6 months, well, I didn't save a plug nickel nowhere. In the meantime, my email all changed, and everything changed, and, now I'm locked in. Now, where do I go from there? Well, you basically, you've got no choices. There are no choices. There are, but not realistic choices. And then what do you hear about? Comcast wants to go together with Time Warner.
Right.
Well, now, how's this going to work out good for me?
It's not.
No, it's not at all.
It's not at all. I got another caller joining us, too, by the way.
Oh, go ahead.
Caller 2, who are you? Where are you from?
Oh, here we go. Well, I'm in Harrisburg. Carl, I was just wondering what, I saw that you were having a broadcast tonight, so I was wondering what we were talking about.
Well, we've been talking about corporate personhood in the Hobby Lobby decision.
Oh, shit. Whoops. Don't broadcast that swear word, but, yeah, corporate person, yeah, I mean, that's a tough thing. I've kind of stayed out of this, in a fashion that it's just respectable to people's opinions, but I've got to stay out of it. I don't really have a strong opinion about it one way or the other.
Well, and let me just tell you, like I had a guy who just, he Facebooked me and says, hey, I don't understand this because isn't really a corporation just a mental concept and it's just a way of saying things and I could go into detail and I'd love if Steve would call in and talk about it because it's a good jumping off point, but here's the point on it. Think of Apple computers. You probably watched that movie with Steve Jobs in it where he gets ousted. Well, if you're familiar with it, with the story. So he founds Apple, and at some point he gets kicked out of the company, okay? Corporations are not these magic, tidy little packages that are under the control of their founders. They can, as they grow or as things change, eventually purge themselves of the very people who founded the company.
That's right, and usually they will get rid of a founder. I mean, it's like, okay, so they have personhood, but they don't have empathy or feelings or any kind of familiar attachment.
Okay, so good.
People
you jumped right in. You jumped right in. You waded right into the river here, and you're right on to something that's an important point. They're not human beings. So
no, they have personhood, but that's with respect to what kind of things that they can.
Well, that's the question.
How they can relate to actual human beings.
Should the law give them absolute personhood and all the same protections? And I argue no, because
it's funny because they don't have any kind of the feelings or familiar associations that actual people do have.
For some reason, we want to lock all the psychopaths up. and all the people who have no moral compasses, but we want to give corporations complete citizenship.
A lot of that stuff just doesn't make no sense, you know?
That's very interesting. Well, Carl, I do have to go, but maybe I'll try to call back in the show, but I did want to see what the topic was.
All right, boss, thanks.
All right, take care.
Yeah, so, Dwayne, and I point that out, that the idea that, a psychopath gets a prison sentence, or we want to socially commit them because they have no loyalty to anybody, and I guess it's only if they act out or do something. But corporations creating a bunch of amoral, long-lived super citizens who will outlive their founders, and will change to fit the times and the needs. And I just don't see why it's important to give them full access to all the rights that human beings have. But then again, we've worked our dogs into people, so maybe our corporations can be people too.
I don't know. Maybe I think about things too simply, maybe too logically, whichever the case may be. But take things that have happened through our life. Take the Exxon Valdez, spill, and the deep oil well that blew up down in the Gulf. But I mean, just environmental devastated huge areas. And I don't know, maybe I'm just not informed, but it just seemed to me like nobody ever really got in any real trouble out of any of it. Okay, so the captain of the ship, they put him in the media and they persecute him. Oh, he's the whole reason, blah, blah, blah. And then it all just goes away and everything just brushed under the rug. And you know what I mean?
Actually, that's another fine point too, which is this. Corporations generally avoid criminal liability at the end of the day. I mean, so they might get a felony, they might get a misdemeanor, but there's nobody to put in jail. Okay?
Right.
There's nobody to put in jail when a corporation. Now, you can put one of the guys that's in the corporation in jail, but
which is what they should do.
But corporations are fungible. So here's the deal: you put my chief financial officer in jail, I'll just hire another one, right? So hey, great, put all the guys in the corporation in jail. That's fine. We'll just get more because people are just an asset of the corporation, just like a desk or a lamp or a truck. Or a building.
I guess a lot of my belief system, back in the mid-'80s, I bought a gas station, pump gas station. And of course the environmental laws came around. In 1989, the underground storage tank laws hit me, and I was right in the thick of it, and starting November of 99, I had to go through a tank removal environmental cleanup, which, to make the long story short, it lasted until 2008. It cost a total of $365,000 on a property that I had originally only paid $175,000 for. In the meantime, I don't even know how I managed to get through it financially, but I did. And and I'm looking at this the whole time this is going on with me. I'm thinking, I'm the man here that's got to answer to all government rules and regulations. And at the end of the day, after 8 or 9 years of going through this, I really didn't do anybody any good.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody gained anything out of that. The only people that gained were the environmental consultants and the DEP and all the people in the excavators and all the people involved. At the end of the day, I wrote them a paycheck.
Well,
you know what I mean? But I didn't do anybody any good. I didn't do myself any good.
Oh, no.
It about put me under.
And the hidden environmental costs. I mean, I could tell you horror stories because there's a great story out of Meadville, Pennsylvania, years ago. The hospital, somebody who lived not too far from the hospital when they died left their
left their house to the hospital, and the land it was on. And, of course, the hospital dutifully accepted it, figured it's going to sell it and make some money. And then somebody figures out, well, wait, that wasn't always a house. There used to be a dry cleaners there. Well, the dry cleaners used to have a big underground tank of dry cleaning fluid or whatever it was.
Yep.
$1 million in remediation later, the hospital can sell the lot for like $100,000, right?
Right.
And, of course, once they took title to it, they got in that chain of title. And so you know the story. You know how the story goes. And so, ladies and gentlemen, should you ever want to buy a piece of property and you do put yourself into the chain of title, it doesn't matter if you only owned it for 2 years and then you sell it to somebody else and then they find the tank that was there when you owned it but was from before when you owned it that you never knew about, you're going to get sucked into the environmental litigation.
Right.
Yeah. And so those are interesting questions too. But again, let's go back to that corporate personhood. So corporations can hold on to land. Let's give you an example. They can hold on to land for 100 years. There are big multinational corporations buying up land all over America in strategic locations with the idea that, well, maybe we can't build on it now, but the taxes are only a few thousand a year. They'll pay $5,000 a year tax bill on a vacant lot for 50 years because they can sit and wait until it's more developable. So they're buying up land around, let's say, interstate exits. So think of the Newville exit out there, okay, in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. The Newville exit has some buildup around it now, but 15 years ago, there's nothing out there. These guys can come out and buy up a chunk of land, 300 acres out there, and hold on to it and go, someday they're going to build up around that exit. The town up there will grow big enough. Somebody will want to drop a McDonald's in. Then they're going to want to put a Petro in. Then they're going to want to put this in. And like every other little exit area, it'll build up and our land will be worth something. But they don't need to make money on it today, tomorrow, or next week. And they can use the write-offs over time.
Or they'll, better yet, they'll use their power and money to coerce the government and or the Congress to adjust the things or the laws or the regulations that would make that happen sooner.
Sure, and if they can't get it legislatively at the congressional level or at the state house level, what they can do is that you got some old bird on the township planning commission or supervisor who would never vote for whatever project you want to do. Well, again, he only lives so long.
Right.
And people think I'm crazy. If you go out and I tell you this, if you know somebody who's a developer, okay, a guy that develops, and I don't mean builds like an occasional house. I mean a real developer who buys big tracts of land regionally or locally, they'll tell you, I'm not in competition, years ago, John Vartan and Franny McNaughton were competing over chunks of land in the Harrisburg area. Both of them would show up looking at the 100-acre farm to figure out who was going to buy it to develop it. Okay, well, those two guys wouldn't in this era be competing with one another. It's not the two local land barons versus each other anymore. It's me versus the local guy versus 5 or 7 guys coming in from overseas or who are local holding companies for somebody overseas who are willing to pay a little more than I am for the land or and because they know that they can't build on it for 5 or 7 or 10 years. But even the local land barons can't afford to sit on it for a decade. They can be held up for a year or 3, but after that they're going to have to kick it because of the carrying cost. These big companies don't. And they actually – so I had a discussion. I always get these interesting conversations, and I know a fairly wealthy guy that his family owns a lot of land, has done a lot of development down in the Maryland area, okay? And there was a chunk of land we were driving by, and he said, yeah, I used to own that land. And I said, well, why'd you sell it? He said, we couldn't make a development work on it. We couldn't run the numbers that would make it work for us. Just wasn't profitable enough to bother with. Well, okay, why are these guys buying it? Well, they're going to develop it. But they don't need the numbers to work. They are actually looking at it on an 80-year time frame.
they are looking at the return on investment in an 80-year time frame. And he said that's not an exaggeration. He's like, and that makes sense to us. We understood why they were buying it because they didn't need it to make money in a decade. They needed it to make money over a longer period, and that's part of a larger strategy. And again, it's a big company. It's a corporation. And they're looking at an 80 – they're buying a piece of land and beginning to develop it a certain way, knowing that they believe over the next almost century they're going to get their maximum value out of it because those are the time scales that they can think on. And like you say, they can just sit around and plot a plan and grab the politicians when the time is right, when everything's ripe. So that's why I'm against corporate personhood, because giving corporations more power than they already have is probably not going to, in the long run, we're going to wake up and they're going to be the captains of the ship.
Right. It seems like that's the way it goes down all the time. I mean, I've been self-employed all my life, making my own paycheck.
Right.
And I've got to make profit tomorrow.
Yeah.
And am I thinking about 10 years from now? Well, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but if I've got to go make money tomorrow.
See, you've got to make.
If somebody wants to put me out of business, they can open up across the street for me, do exactly what I do, and if they have a lot of money and they don't need to make the money, well, it's going to put me right out of business.
Right. Well, when I was in college, we had a pizza shop open up in town. The first, maybe second semester of the first year, and it was called Pizza from Mars. Okay, it's like a crazy name, and they did some campus special, so you could get a large pizza for $4 delivered to your dorm room. Okay, now that's going back a few years, but everybody else was like $8 in town. And there was 3 or 4 pizza shops in Meadville, Pennsylvania at the time. And these guys came in, and when they were done, it was them and one other guy. And the other guy only hung on by the fact that his pizza was far better than theirs.
Right.
But they had a deliberate strategy. They just came in and undercut the heck out of everybody, and they starved out about 2 other pizza shops because they couldn't make a living when they couldn't get any of the campus deliveries. And quite frankly, college students, pizza, hey, if it's half the price, I'm going with the half price one, even if it's not exactly what I want.
Right. It'll still fill your belly and take care of the needs at the time, and you can move on.
Now,
right. And then you have enough beer money.
Right. The difference between what you're doing, you and I are working, okay? We're not managing wealth. Now, there are people who work for the companies, right? And they draw salaries, and they're working for a living. But a lot of these companies corporations are not necessarily, so there's some corporations that produce things, right? And some corporations just manage investments or wealth that they control. Think of hedge funds and things like that, where they just manage money. They don't actually build anything. They just manage money. Now, they may invest in things that create things, and they may employ people and create wages that way. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, they're not necessarily looking at I must do something.
They produce nothing.
Right, and they can use passive.
They produce nothing.
They can use passive.
They're not making widgets. They're not providing a service. They're non-producers. Yeah,
and theoretically, maybe some of their wealth or money may be in investment pools and other places, but they can continue to grow and survive on very passive activities. Which again, and then when you use tax, when you overlay tax issues, corporations can sometimes, okay, I'm going to take a loss on this, but they don't really see it as a loss because it just offsets tax payments they would have had to make anyhow. Therefore, again, it's just smart money management, because if I can create a situation where I can develop a depreciation deduction that I'm allowed to take, and I can use it because of the nature of my business as a straight line expense and not a passive income versus active income analysis. I mean, I could just go on and on with this, but the long and short of it is they get the best deals, and they can think things through, and they can build these things out. And again, they do them on timescales. So why the hell do we want to give them even more power? And I think the problem with the Hobby Lobby decision is my conservative friends are all excited with the idea that Obama took some pipe on the Affordable Care Act. And that's the end of their analysis, right? They're like, this is great. Yeah. And it is great from that standpoint. But it's also kind of like, not drowning because you're standing on your wife. Great, you didn't drown, but somebody drowned. It's just not as clean of a decision as I see it, because I see it as this creeping corporate personhood. And I think I'm onto something here. I don't know, but I think I'm onto something, that this is going to become a major issue, because the Congress is not going to peel these things back. The president is not going to peel these things back. They are bought and owned by the big corporations already. The politicians, in 1986, the Tax Reform Act 1986 was a surprise to everybody, because Congress finally came out with a major tax revision that basically damned a lot of very powerful lobbies, okay?
Right.
I think I've heard it termed showdown at Gucci Gulch, because that's what they used to call the lobbyists with their Gucci shoes. That might be the title of a book on the Tax Reform Act. But the point on what I'm trying to aim at is that Congress has been, and the American government has been capable of great moments of brilliance, okay? And actually doing something that isn't just naked politics. But it's very rare. In fact, it's so rare that when it happens, it surprises the hell out of everybody. And
it's few and far between.
Right. And given the increasing dependence on corporate funds, or at least the perceived, I don't want to be the one guy who dries up. The military, for instance, okay, they're manipulated all the time. The United States military has to buy weapon systems they don't want. And people go, well, come on, they're not really buying a weapon system they don't want. You're like, yeah, Congress tells them they have to buy it. Because Raytheon goes in to Senator so-and-so's office and they go, hey, if they cut this project, I'm going to have to close down 2,000 workers in your state. And then they go over to another guy in another state and they go, oh, yeah, well, we have 2,000 workers working on this in another state, but we actually have 500 right in your district, Congressman. And we ship the widgets that are half made from one area of the country to another area of the country, or outsource. So if you look at the typical military industrial supply chain, right, they don't build everything in one location. They scatter these jobs out in these facilities that are strategically placed so that they can go in and go, hey, Congressman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, if the military cancels this, we're going to lose jobs in your state, your district. And with Congressman, it's district, and it's even more painful, right? Because states are big. Districts are small. And if you lose 2,000 jobs in a district, you feel it because you get blamed. And they make sure you get blamed. And that's been done for a long time. So how is it that the military gets stuck buying weapons systems? They're like, well, the corporations manipulate the politicians with threats of, here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to be the guy that lost all the jobs in your district by not voting for this. And so they already do it. Corporations already successfully manipulate the politicians. Just keep giving them more and more power because they're going to run with it.
Right. I guess I sort of have a question, and I understand you're not technically a lawyer anymore, so if you can't go there, just tell me.
Yeah.
But over the years, I've been in business for myself 30 years, and over the years, everybody says, well, why aren't you incorporated? Why aren't you incorporated? Well, I actually was for a while. Actually, all I ever did was paid more tax because corporate tax rates were higher. And at the end of the day, every time I'd ask an attorney, well, no, look, let's say I work on a car and something happens, and that car, spews into a school bus and kills 36 kids. At the end of the day, after my insurance is exhausted, who's responsible for it? Mm-hmm. Well, it all comes back on me. And I'm thinking, why have an incorporation?
Well,
but it seems like when you're small like me, there's really no benefit. But if I was a big, huge corporation worth billions of dollars with, thousands of people, it seems like then, at the end of the day, I'd walk away.
Right.
Am I right or am I wrong? Or
here's the answer. Obviously, I'm not giving legal advice, but what I used to tell clients is incorporating is not necessary necessarily. You know, there are so many different scenarios. First of all, you should talk to a CPA because a CPA will tell you what the best tax strategy is. So sometimes you do create corporations. Okay, so here's a real typical structure you see. You see a husband and wife who own a corporation, but maybe just the husband owns the corporation, maybe just the wife owns it, maybe they both do, depending. And then the husband and wife own real estate as a couple, okay? And the real estate rents its location to the corporation. Now, the advantage there is if the corporation goes belly up with debts, the real estate is not in the corporation, so it's not an asset of the corporation. If the corporation gets sued, you can only reach what's in the corporation. You can't reach the husband and wife, so you can't reach their real estate. But at a practical level, when the husband and wife go to get a business loan, the banker is going to make them personally guarantee it, even though it's a corporate loan. So their real estate's still at play in any banking disputes because the bankers are certainly not going to let somebody – you just can't form a corporation and walk into a bank and say, my corporation wants a loan. They'll look at you and say, that's great. Your corporation can have a loan, and you're going to personally guarantee it.
What are their assets?
Right. What are their assets? Yeah. And by the way, you're still going to personally guarantee it because you got to be a pretty damn big corporation before they stop looking for owners' personal guarantees.
Right.
And so even leases, commercial leases, I used to have clients with commercial leases. And a lot of times the commercial lease would require that the husband and wife personally guarantee, even though it was an LLC or a corporation was actually doing the rental. They want to see who the actual owners of the closely held corporation are. And even if it was just the husband or just the wife, they'd want the spouse so that they could reach assets of the marriage. So at one level, there's no great practical protection. In fact, a good insurance package usually is all you need. But whether to incorporate or why to incorporate, to me, was always more about what a tax professional would tell you than it was about liability worries, because if you had good insurance packages, it wouldn't matter anyhow. But any which way you look at it, it's just endless red tape.
Right. And I was running under an LLC for a number of years.
Right.
And I actually folded it up and quit.
Right.
It's like, well, there's no benefit. There's no advantage. In fact, there was a disadvantage.
If you're married, then your personal assets aren't reachable. So if you're working, if I'm out working somewhere and I'm doing something and I run somebody over, you can sue me and you can take my assets. But if I'm married, you can't take the marriage's assets in Pennsylvania. So as a result,
and quite honestly, that's really my only form of protection that I really have.
Right.
And that's realistically what I do. That's my business is me. I own the real estate, me. It's all me. And everything else that me and my wife have is us. Right.
And that's and that's probably, I can't really render an opinion, but I would say that's probably a strategy that I've seen employed over the years many times. Now, it's still something that you would regularly want to consult with a CPA or a lawyer about to think about, is there any reason to change it now?
And of course, I have a CPA full-time all the time.
Right.
Had for 30 years, you're in business or you were or whatever, and, you're married to them. And I don't have a problem with them.
Right.
They got a job to do too,
Well,
and guys like me need guys like them.
Yeah, we can't all know everything all the time. Trust me.
Correct.
And that's one of the issues. But yeah, so of course here's the next question, right? Why did the Hobby Lobby take a corporate form? Well, they took a corporate form because they want some protection for their little heinies at home, right? And the same thing with Conestoga Woodcrafters. That's why I kind of actually am very sympathetic to, and I think I've said this before, to Health and Human Services argument that they don't have to incorporate. If they want to stand on religious principle, they may. That's exactly what they said to the court, by the way. They just said they just don't need to incorporate. Now, belying that argument, Health and Human Services, see, Obama got himself stuck. I don't know if you remember this or not, but this is just how politics really works. he got himself stuck because they were trying to decide whether they're going to give religious accommodations on birth control. I don't know if you remember this or not, but Congress passes the ACA. Then it comes out, well, we're going to require birth control as part of the regulations. Well, then there was a blowback. The Catholic Church went nuts, and the Obama administration came out and said, well, the regulations are going to include accommodations for religious organizations, okay? Well, they did. They did. Well, guess what? A lot of religious organizations are not-for-profit corporations and things like that. They're all structured legally as corporate.
501c3s.
Yep. And as a result, what the Supreme Court kind of pushed back and said was, hey, you guys are saying that this is that would be very difficult for the government to make an accommodation here, because that's the balancing test. Once they find that the Religious Protection Act, Religious Rights Restoration Act, or whatever it was, applied, then it's a balancing test. And of course, it's really hard for the government, because the government's in there now going, well, it's going to be very difficult to create an accommodation. And the court's looking at them going, actually, you've made accommodations for lots of other kinds of corporations. So what's the difference with Hobby Lobby? What's the difference with these guys? There's no difference. Right. You can do exactly with them what you did with the other ones. And so Obama's position, and I say Obama's the U.S. government's position, the administration's position in court would have been a lot stronger if they didn't make any accommodation for anybody, because then they'd come in and say, hey, we made no accommodations for anybody based on religion, because this system will only work if we apply it this way. But again, once you make a compromise, you have to live with both sides of that compromise. So they won some brownie points back in the day when they agreed to do it, but it ultimately was part of their undoing, because that's one of the things the court pointed as one of the reasons. Saying, you can't tell us that there's any worries here that anything is going to be up, any apple carts are going to be upset, because you're already doing it for other guys.
Right. And while you were just talking, and I'll throw something out, Jeff.
Yeah.
I just thought of another show for you some evening.
Oh, yeah?
It could be titled 501c3.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about, like, for instance, Penn State, Lancaster General, 501c3s, nonprofit corporations. And I'm sorry, but everywhere I look, all I see is them making huge amounts of profit. And, okay. Carl, I think what we both need to be is 501c3s.
Well, sure,
because
absolutely.
I don't know what you're doing for a living, but I know what I'm doing for a living. And there's a whole lot of what I'm doing for a living is nonprofit. But I can't get that status.
Well, it's sort of like talking to bankers, and then you say the word credit union, and they get all upset.
Yes.
And it's because credit unions don't have any bottom line, so they don't have to. I mean, they have a bottom line, but they don't have to ship any money off to the shareholders at the end of the year. So they can use all that savings, so to speak, to lower their interest rates, lower their fees, and do all the things that customers like. And so, from a banking standpoint, it's an unfair competition. Well, guess what? If I'm a for-profit hospital and I have to compete with a not-for-profit hospital, profit hospital has to take some profit out once in a while, right? The not-for-profit guys, they get to defer all that money, and this is where there's how it should work and how it works and how academia says it works and how market systems say it works and how it really works and all the distortions of the real world. Because I would be naive if I said that not-for-profits are always wasteful, because they're not. And I would be naive if I said that for-profit entities are always efficient, right? Because that's not necessarily true. Either one's capable of being what it's not supposed to be, depending on the market circumstances and whatever is going on with it. So you can have some not-for-profits where, because there's no need for great efficiency, they might bloat and they have overly big salaries, and especially the management. It's like being a member of the Communist Party. You just suddenly end up with a dacha somehow. While on the other hand, you can have these for-profit corporations that are supposed to be lean, mean, and efficient, and they've got all kinds of problems and mismanagement, and they're no prize either. So I certainly can make an argument, that either one has its merits. But the problem with not-for-profits is when they're poorly run, then that deferral mechanism, or that ability not to have to pay some taxes and or not to be disgorged a profit to shareholders and the like, can lead to the executive director making 5 times what anybody else in a similar position in a for-profit hospital would make, for instance, right?
Right. And I wasn't picking one hospital.
No, and this is like, look at the Hershey Trust. The Hershey Trust a few years ago, with all these guys with these giant salaries to be on the trust, buying golf courses off themselves and all kinds of things. Now, they got a free pass because they knocked the golf course down and put some kiddie housing up, which was probably wholly unnecessary, but it sure made it seem like it was necessary.
Right.
But and actually, there's literature out there. I've read some of it. And the Philadelphia Inquirer had done a great series on the Hershey Trust where they cited some of it, because there's experts on trust management who basically say, like, not-for-profits and trusts that have this endless, pile of money, you have to actually monitor them. And there's good ways of setting, So, for instance, really big trusts, for instance, shouldn't be only operating in one state. They were saying if you're a big charitable trust, you should really have 2 bases of operations in 2 different states, and that's to keep your respective state legislatures from abusing you. To give it, because if you're in Arizona and Pennsylvania, Arizona's not going to let Pennsylvania politicians suck all the money out of the trust, right? Or manipulate the trust for the benefit of Pennsylvania, and the same, and vice versa. And that actually they have studies of these giant trusts, and when they're captive to one state like Hershey is, magically, the politicians, there's too cozy of a relationship. So very fascinating. It goes back towards, again, the evil of corporations and the corrosive effect it has on politics.
Yeah, and really, maybe here again, I think about things too simple. But if you take corporations, and it don't matter how big they are, and the executive branch of that corporation, if you would hold those people personally accountable for the corporation's, come on, I just brain farted.
Liabilities or
whatever their doings, wrongdoings, whatever. I think you would start seeing corporations in general clean up their acts.
Well, there is liability for corporate directors and whatnot in certain cases.
It just doesn't seem like, though, it happens very often.
No, and
it just doesn't appear to be something that is regularly taking place.
And here's what happens. So your corporation does something bad. Well, the corporation pays some money, and then they sacrifice 1 or 2 guys.
Right. They throw them out there at the media, and they throw them at whatever.
Bob takes the hit.
Hey, Bob, this was the bad guy too. We got taken care of, and we're back on track, and everything's all good again.
Right. I'm going to give some money to
in reality, the top 50 guys' heads should have rolled.
They give some money to a charity, and they do all the things that again, a guy with a lot of money can do.
Right.
And, by the way, the corporation doesn't go to jail. There's only one thing you do to a corporation. You can terminate the corporation. It's called the corporate death sentence. But here's what happens. So if I'm the prosecutor, right, and it's Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, and I go after, let's just make up a local corporation like, Lear's not here anymore, right, but he used to be called Maslin's. So imagine it's back in the day, and Maslin does something bad, the corporation. And so I roll in as the local prosecutor, and I say, or even as the attorney general of the state, and I say, you guys broke an environmental law, so I'm going to knock you out of business. How fast do you think I'm unelected in the next term when I'm responsible for killing 1,000 people's jobs?
Right.
And that's the reality of politics, again, as it applies to the prosecutorial discretion when it comes to corporations. Corporations have something powerful, which is employees, particularly a company that has a lot of employees concentrated somewhere. And that's always a hammer that they can hold over any politician or prosecutor who threatens them with, Armageddon. They look at you and they go, fine, Armageddon, great. Tell it to these guys down here. All these people that make $35,000 a year who voted for you last time? Yeah, Tell them that.
Yeah, it's just like in my town years ago. We had a place called Klein Chocolate, and of course it became M&M Mars.
Okay.
And that was all well and good. I forget how many jobs they provide to the community. I mean, yeah, it's all good, But what do they do? It seems like every decade or every 20 years or whatever, they okay, well, we're going to move. We're going to move somewhere else. And the local governments come to them and they strike all these deals. Well, hey, we'll give you property tax relief for 10 years, and we'll do this and we'll do that, and pet you over the head and tell you you're all good and everything's all rosy, and if you just hang around and keep these people working. And then you take a guy like me that I employ 3 people.
Right.
Where are my perks? You know what I mean? Why can't I get property tax?
Okay, for okay.
3 years or 5 years just to keep my guys working, and you know what I mean? It just seems like the offset that there is no balance.
So you just hit on a very important point. Now, Republicans quite often claim that Democrats are anti-business and Republicans are pro-business. Okay,
there's no difference between the two.
Right, but let's stop on this for a second. Democrats quite often, whether they're the governor of a state or legislature, will engage in this exact same behavior as Republicans will, which is giving a business some kind of break or favoritism or corporate welfare in order to keep them in the area or to attract them to build jobs or whatever, okay?
Right.
Well, the reality of that is they are not acting as free market advocates. They are not acting as people who believe in capitalism. They're acting the same way central planners in communist states do, saying this is what I want and this is where I want it, and applying some methodology to get it there.
That's a good analogy.
And
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and so anytime a Republican claims to be pro-business, the real question is, are you pro-business or pro-market? Same thing for a Democrat. Are you pro-business or are you pro-market? And most politicians at the end of the day are not pro-market because markets are variable. And so you might have that plant in your town with 1,000 employees, and then they're going to go somewhere else. Well, pro-market people don't do anything about it. They just live with it. Pro-business people, they buy that business off because they're pro that particular business, the one that's employing their locals. Did I lose you? I don't know.
Hello, Carl.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, what's up?
Hey, Carl, how are you?
Good, man, good. I think I lost Dwayne.
Oh, shoot. I want to say congratulations on this bid for the Oval Office.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if your listeners are aware of that, but you have been talking to a potential presidential candidate there.
Who's running for president?
Dwayne.
Oh, good. I hope so.
You didn't see his post on Facebook?
No, not yet.
Yeah, he announced his bid for the White House.
Well,
on Facebook.
It couldn't be any worse than what we've got right now.
Well,
So Don, I mean, first of all, you're in all kinds of trouble with all kinds of people on my Facebook page as usual. But how do you feel about this concept of corporate personhood? Do you think it's a good idea to give corporations the same rights as people, or is there a balance somewhere in there? I mean, I probably would say there has to be a balance somewhere. I'm just concerned that they're usurping all the power.
Well, I think that's where it's headed. And I think if I were a woman, I would be no longer a customer for Hobby Lobbies. I think it's funny that Hobby Lobby sells things for women. Let's be honest. I mean, there aren't a lot of guys who do crafts. I mean, maybe there are, but it's predominantly a woman's.
You mean it's not like filled with model rockets? It's filled more.
Correct, yeah.
More with
your
beads.
Double D engines that you like.
Yes. It's filled more with beads and the
right, the D's. But I like you when you mentioned that you said double D.
Yes,
cool.
I did say that.
I know it's on your mind, you pervert.
So Hobby Lobby. Now, was it you who posted?
Cater to women, and then they okay.
You still there, Don?
Hello, Carl.
Hey, Dwayne. I think I accidentally killed Don.
Oh, I thought maybe Verizon, the corporation, decided it was time for my call to be over.
Oh, Don's still on here still. Don, can you hear me?
Yeah, hey, I hear you got another caller. Don't let me interrupt you.
All right, I don't know if Don, if we can still hear Don or not. I'm confused. I lost him. I don't know why Skype's not playing nice right now.
Yeah, I kind of had a question about that. I have Skype loaded on my computer.
Yeah.
Is that how I should call in?
You can, but
Skype?
you can use Skype. But I have the dial-in number that comes straight into Skype, so we can do this. Now I'm going to try to add Don to the group call again, and let's see what happens. So,
okay.
All right, Don, you're back.
Dude, I'm going to start calling you the dead air dude.
No, dude, we didn't. I got everybody now. By the way, I want to let you know this. I am at 91 minutes straight now without any interruption. I mean, we may have lost you on Skype, Don, but other than that, I mean, this radio show has actually.
Did we really lose anything, Carl?
No, we didn't lose any show.
Oh, I was plugging your presidency, dude.
Oh.
I'm trying to look out for you.
So, all right.
I'm trying to drum up votes for your campaign, my friend.
But I want to talk.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
keep up the good work.
Yeah, Dwayne, he wants to get.
Throw that out there.
So
now,
you got to be a hater right away.
Oh, you know how it is. You know.
Well, boys, so here's.
You're swayed too easily by opinions on Facebook.
Right. I know. But here's my question. So it might have been you, Don, who posted this. That Hobby Lobby invests in Pfizer, and I'm trying to remember what the other corporation is that makes some kind of birth control that's objectionable to them. In other words, somebody traced it and proved that Hobby Lobby actually has investments in other companies who make the products that they claim they can't provide to their own employees.
Well, nobody said Christians are smart people.
Well, don't be inflammatory now. But I understand what you're saying.
I'm sorry.
Hey, Carl.
You know where I stand on that.
Right.
Hey, Carl, I got to cut you off. My family's showing up. It's going to get noisy around
all
here.
right, yeah.
So,
get the hell out of here.
Evening.
Thanks,
I'll try
Dwayne.
To get back later.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm
Thanks,
only on till 9, so Sunday.
All right.
So
Good
Don.
night, Don.
Night, man.
Good night, Dwayne.
Good night.
Good night, John boy. That was coming, right?
We are pretty much like a group of Waltons.
Yeah. Good night, John boy. But seriously though, I mean, and that's an interesting question because Hobby Lobby basically was saying that by making me do something like this, and the Supreme Court has language in the opinion that talks about this, Don, which is the idea that, oh God, somebody else is calling in. Look at this. Next caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Carl. How you doing?
Good. I might have hung up on Don, so you know.
Oh, poor Don.
I know. I feel bad for him. All right, what's going on?
Well, I was just thinking with the whole Hobby Lobby thing.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Trying to turn.
Yeah, that's the feedback.
Radio. Oh, I'm sorry. But with everything that's going on with them, and you just said that they were trying to have stuff that. Oh, never mind.
Did I lose you? I think I lost her. That was a hang up. I think she just gave up. All right. I can't seem to get two guys to. We had two guys for a minute there. Hey Don, welcome back. So I don't know what happened to that girl. She decided to hang up. But here's what I was going to say. So in the Supreme Court's opinion, they talk about this and they say, it's an interesting question about compelling somebody to do an act which in and of itself is moral, but which may facilitate somebody else's immoral act. Now, we can debate the fine points of whose morals we're talking about, but let's assume that we're just looking at the morals of the person, of a person's own moral compass. So assume that the guys in Hobby Lobby really believe that abortion's murder and could go to hell for it and everything like that, and that's their sincere belief. But yet, nonetheless, merely making contraception available is not immoral in and of itself because women would still have to choose to use that particular form of contraception, right? And employ it. And therefore, you're not compelling them to do any direct immoral act, but even if their act is moral, it enables an immoral act. And the Supreme Court said, there's always a question on whether compelling somebody to do something that's moral, which could or does lead to allow somebody else to do something that's immoral, again, under their belief structure, not anybody particular belief structure, that's important to look at. And we lost Don, but I don't know why we lost Don that time. So what they're trying to say, or what they're trying to point out in that logic is, Hobby Lobby shouldn't have to be in a situation where they promote the use of birth control, which could lead to an abortion, because that's unfair to them. And in that regard, it makes some level of sense. Okay, in other words, but then why is Hobby Lobby investing in corporations and have interest in corporations who create products and market and enable products to do the exact same thing? Because remember, Hobby Lobby is drawing a profit from those things. So are they saying that we can't, it's like the Amish with a horse and buggy. I can't own a car, but I can ride in a car. So I can't give a woman the money to do an abortion. But if a woman gives us the money to pay for products from a different corporation that I'm invested in, I can keep those few cents that each of those abortions creates. I think Hobby Lobby has a problem. And if they, in fact, do own these other companies, so I think we need to do a little research on that. But my understanding was they had money invested in Pfizer and another company, both of whom provided products that I'm just trying to see this. Hobby Lobby investments. Maybe this will give us some. Hobby Lobby does invest in birth control. So yeah, I think the fix might be out on this now. So, hey Don, I don't know, what'd you do? Hang up on me?
No, I think it's on your end.
Oh, come on, that's impossible.
At least that's been the precedent.
That's true. So let's see.
So I was trying to catch what you were saying. I'm sorry, I walked into the other room so I could kind of hear what you were saying while I was cut off.
So Hobby Lobby, Hobby Lobby basically now, and one of the arguments is Hobby employees, okay, put money in 401k plans. And over 13,000 past and present employees have taken advantage of that plan, according to the latest documents filed with the Department of Labor. Employees have the option to put their retirement dollars and the money that Hobby Lobby contributes on their behalf in over a dozen different mutual funds. At least 8 of those funds have invested in companies that produce contraceptives, such as Teva, Bayer, and Pfizer, according to CNN and Money Analysis. Teva makes Plan B. At least one fund also held Forest Laboratories, which is a drug they use to induce abortions. And Hobby Lobby puts money into these 401k plans on behalf of its employees. So there are Catholic value funds, by the way, that screen out companies that are involved with abortion or that are anti-family and whose policies undermine the sacrament of marriage. So there would be ways of doing this. But anyhow, it was pointed out. And so maybe Hobby Lobby itself is not putting their own corporate funds in there, but they have picked plans which allow their employees to invest in mutual funds that invest in companies that make birth control. So they are indirectly deriving a benefit from abortion drugs that they don't want to supply to their own people. I know it sounds circuitous, but if one of the issues raised by Hobby Lobby is, hey, we don't want to be made to do something that facilitates somebody else doing something, well, then you shouldn't be adding employer contributions to money in these companies either, because you're facilitating abortions indirectly that way. So
we laymen call that a hypocrite.
Yeah, okay, right. That's the term. Right, that's the simple term. It may be a circuitous route, but it is nonetheless a form of hypocrisy, yes. And again, now one of my buddies, he'll be like, you're beating up on religious people again, and I'm not beating up on religious people. I find it fascinating, though, that they go to court and make such a fine distinction. Now, Hobby Lobby itself may say, now, wait a minute. We didn't make such a fine distinction. Our lawyers made such a fine distinction. We just looked at the lawyer and said, hey, We just don't think we should have to pay for birth control. And they came back and said, well, you're going to have to pay for 10 out of 14 kinds of birth control because I can't do anything about that. But here's the 4 I can win, and just trust me, here's how I'm going to do it. Because remember, the legal arguments forwarded by lawyers are not necessarily the refined arguments of the client. Because usually...
That's why they charge so much.
Right, because they have to refine the... when I was practicing, I occasionally had clients who cared how they won. And what I mean by that, they'd be all obsessed with, I'm like, I get this charge dismissed on a technicality. No, I want the judge to say I'm innocent. And you're like, listen, the judge may not say you're innocent. I've been around this block a few times. And even if you are innocent, they may say you're not innocent. And even if you're guilty, they may say you're innocent. Quit worrying about winning it on the merits. If you have a way to get rid of this charge or a way to solve this, get this lawsuit dismissed or out of your hair. But some guys and some gals, they're obsessed with how they're going to win it. They want some nuance. But most people go to their lawyers and simply say, I want a result. And the lawyer says, okay, if we want a result, then we'll work towards a result. Just don't question how I'm going to get there or why, because a lot of it's not going to make sense because it hardly makes sense at all anyhow. And it's just all a bunch of pretend language that we lawyers banter about and judges decide things on in this weird semantical forest called law. So in that regard, whatever. You can't say...
It's all about defining morality. I mean, you were talking about morality earlier, but a lot of it has to do with defining what exactly is morality. I mean, whose morality are we following?
And... by the way, Lucinda says she has no problem buying a bedazzler from Hobby Lobby.
Hey, I even give them money. I hate to confess, but I do sometimes need some things that they have that I buy there.
Yeah, and
I do it begrudgingly, but I do it.
And listen, I accidentally ate a Chipotle the other day, and I'm not really happy about their gun thing, but I forgot about it and walked in there and ate. And then after I walked, I said, I was boycotting these guys. Damn it! Why did I eat here?
Were you packing when you walked in there?
Well, I may have been. That leaves all those little lines. But seriously, so I just go back to the Hobby Lobby decision and I say it's an interesting decision. Now, here's the other thing, though. If you actually read it, it was not decided on any fundamental issue. In fact, the court's analysis is actually pretty, almost like once you read it, you kind of go, they probably should have come to this decision anyhow because of the way the laws are written. And once Congress has basically said you've got to accommodate people's religious views. The only interesting question is whether a corporation is people or not. And Health and Human Services, the federal government basically said, hey, if these guys weren't corporations, they should probably win. But they are corporations. Now, Don, I got another caller coming in, so I may lose you, okay?
All right, well, let's see what happens.
I don't know. Oh, caller, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hello, what's going on?
I actually wanted to officially say happy birthday to you on air.
Oh, yes, thank you. I just turned 41 yesterday, unfortunately.
41? Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm a young buck.
You're a baby.
You are a pup.
I am.
You just got your pubes there, Carl.
Well, we aren't going to talk about that.
Good Lord.
Yeah, it's too much. That's too much information for even me. I'm gonna.
That's because his waxing appointment was late.
Yes,
yeah, you might get the Brazilian.
The Brazilian. Let me tell you something. I suspect that if I ever went anywhere remotely near a person that does that kind of work, and they took one look at me, they'd be like, "All right, we charge by the square inch, and this is gonna." My shoulders, my back, my nose.
I think we'd hear your cries of pain all the way here in the.
Lucida, thank you very much. And I did have a nice birthday yesterday. My son called me and sang me happy birthday.
Nothing better than that.
I think you're off the air, Carl.
No, I'm not off the air. Did I lose?
Yeah, well, the feed in the other room went silent.
No, it better not have. That's probably on your end, because I still say I'm on the air.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll proceed.
Lucinda, you still talking over there? Or you letting Don take over? No, we're going straight, man. We're going straight through here. We're up at an hour and 105 minutes now of straight broadcast.
Okay, I hear you coming back on now. Okay, you're back on now.
That had to be you, because I didn't get one blip over here.
Okay, good.
Well, I don't know. Well, maybe we'll listen to the feedback someday and check. I never listen to my own shows except for little snippets once in a while because I don't want to hear how bad it actually sounds. Plus,
it sounds really good.
Well, thank you. Tonight I talked quite a bit because it's actually a topic. Sometimes I have to keep talking, and you're going, "Holy hell, am I going to keep talking all this time?" And what am I going to say? But this one, I just feel kind of strongly about it, and it kind of makes sense to me. I could be proven wrong someday, but I still just worry about these corporations and giving them endless power. Now they both just hung up, but that's okay. That's the Skype connection. Here's what happened. I very brilliantly have alternative internet connection up tonight. So Skype is still on Comcast. And yep, the Comcast went down, and now I see that it's popping back up. Maybe it's down for good. Now it's back up again. See? So we didn't get any eruptions on this show tonight because I'm on an AT&T connection. And I'm going to tell you something else. This is really annoying. And Dwayne may appreciate this. Welcome back, Lucinda. That was Comcast that went down. And what I did tonight was I'm broadcasting through my AT&T handheld that I use as an internet connection, okay, on this one laptop. And here comes Don back, too. So, Don, that was Comcast going down on the Skype side of things.
Okay, dead air.
But the reason we haven't lost the broadcast at all, and I was going to say, because Dwayne called in and I talk about, Comcast. Well, here's my bitch with Comcast. It is them that seems to go down. And I did a speed test, and the upload speed, the best upload speeds I can get with Comcast are a little less than 1 megabit per second. And download speeds are like 7 or 8 megabits per second, which isn't bad, okay. But I put my AT&T phone on, and I get 9 megabits download, and I get like 2.5 megabits upload. And I'm like, well, first of all, upload's important because I'm talking, right? And I'm loading up on Skype, and I'm loading up on Spreaker. Right. So download speed's important, but it's high enough on either. But AT&T has not had one blip in the service. And I think that's what I'm going to do from now on is I'm just going to broadcast this through the AT&T wireless connection. Now, isn't it pathetic that my wireless cell phone is better internet connection than Comcast? I mean, isn't that pathetic somehow?
That is pathetic.
Thank you, AT&T.
I have to tell you, I was on the phone with Comcast for an hour yesterday and an hour the day before because of I didn't have service, and it's pretty bad. I was so frustrated when Dwayne was talking earlier. I'm like, I hear you. I understand. It's a pain.
Yeah, and so I was kind of like, that is just so weird. And you don't notice. I'm telling you, you don't notice your internet blips until you're doing something like this, where a strong connection is essential. Do you know what I mean? If you're reading emails, you're never going to know. A typical website, you might. When you're watching Netflix and it just buffers for a second, that's probably actually missing the internet connection for a second. It just drives me mentally insane. And the other thing with AT&T, by the way, and this is not a commercial for AT&T, because the only sponsor we have right now is One Wipe Charlie, not AT&T. Go to the Men's Shave Club, order some One Wipe Charlies, and think of me every time you use them. Yeah, I know. I really want to be One Wipe. It would be my goal in life to say, Mom, I'll call her up. Mom, guess what? One Wipe Charlie is our sponsor. And then she's going to ask me what a One Wipe Charlie is. And then I'm going to have to explain it to her on the air. That is going to be the greatest moment.
When you do that?
Yeah, I'm going to do that live. That's going to be the greatest moment. So if you're listening out there, one Dollar Shave Club guy, with all your frickin' ads, why not just get one more? I'm cheap. I'll just take a lifetime supply of One Wipe Charlies.
Carl's got the cleanest pooper in Carlisle.
Well, not hard to do. So,
why do your phone calls always digress?
Yes, well, because the two of you take me down the hill.
No, don't suck me into his.
Right.
I don't want to disappoint. Listen, I'm sorry.
Don's here for the controversy, but seriously, going back to so AT&T, they have some plan now where you get 10 gigabytes a month. Well, 10 gigabytes a month is enough capacity to watch friggin' movies every day on your phone and not incur any extra charges. So I'm like, well, heck, we'll hook this thing up and we'll make it all work. So thank you, Android. Thank you, Google. Thank you, AT&T. To hell with you, Comcast. And that's where we're gonna go for the moment. Well, anyhow, I'm going to wrap this show up. So you guys got to
wait before you skate out early, because you're Mr. Skate Out Early.
I am going to skate out.
I'm really disappointed in my radio time here. You've been skating out early the last couple of weeks.
Well, we actually quit early the other day because we heard you were about to get off work and call in.
But I had a serious question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Now that you are Nostradamus,
yes,
and you're prognosticating the coming World War,
World War III. And Japan just declared. Japan just declared what?
Japan. That's what I want to talk about.
Right.
Japan is actually funding their own military.
Right. They're saying Japan is now saying we have the right to take more aggressive action than we've historically recognized under a new interpretation of our previous interpretation from our Constitution. Because when we wrote their Constitution, we wrote in a very strong pacifism clause. Forbidding them from basically having an army. They have a national defense force. And apparently they have a big Buddhist movement made up mainly of women who are very pacifist in the country and who have a lot of political power because they vote en masse. And for Abe, apparently Abe, who's done this, has done this over the protest of a majority of the people. But this is part of the geopolitical realignment that's going on. China is rattling. And Japan is doing this. Now, somebody else has told me something else interesting. A little while ago, China let out or said, we have a new ballistic missile that can hit an aircraft, any aircraft carrier anywhere in the world, radar-guided ballistic missile that we can launch from China and take out a U.S. aircraft carrier anywhere in the world. Now, they just happened to mention that at a press conference or a release or something like that. So then magically, we just released that we have some new, quote new, because military stuff's never new when they tell you about it, right? Some new carbon nano fog, which can completely make a target invisible to radar, and that if we knew a ballistic missile were launched at one of our aircraft carriers, we have the ability to completely scramble their ability to see anything whatsoever, and that they become the radar guidance portion becomes worthless. And of course, this was part of the escalation. That's China threatening us. And then we say, oh yeah, well guess what? Turns out your threat isn't so bad because that ball ain't going to hit because we've got something that will prevent that. And so they declassify that. So we've got Japan changing their national defense system around a little bit, basically saying now we can be a little more aggressive. They've couched it in very careful terms, but it's going to allow for more operations and pushing troops out, getting them more experienced and that sort of thing. We've got escalation going on in the Soviet Union. We've got Iraq going on. I'm telling you, it's a world. It's a whole hot mess right now.
Well, here's the kind of the other kind of like underlying theme of that I've been kind of getting from some of your listeners. They've been talking about the Rothschild cabal.
Yeah.
And so how that's sort of like the politics, because I was reading today about Spain.
Uh-huh.
And like in 2008, how Spain was like borrowing from themselves to pay themselves. They're taking from their social welfare programs and using it to pay for, other programs. It's like there's sort of like it's a clusterfuck going on there. And how Rothschild, had his fingers involved in the politics of Spain. I really don't understand it. I guess I'm not that knowledgeable about the whole thing.
The one caller was basically saying, I think the other day, that there's this cabal of very wealthy individuals and the hegemons, and they allow this unrest to boil up. It doesn't work exactly like that. And what I mean by that is nobody controls everything.
I mean, just you can't. And just when
I want to believe that. I hope that's right.
Yeah, and nobody does because there's too many factions, and sometimes one bubbles up. But is there a lot of guidance going on? Is there a lot of backroom meetings? Is there a lot of information? Yeah, there is a lot of that going on. But the power of the people is still the power of the people. You had
now
to.
Everybody's saying, "Let's go Iceland on their ass."
Right, people from all the way back. The Romans knew. If you lose the populace, the masses can rise up, And it always reminds me, a great book if you haven't read it, is The Good Earth by Pearl S. Buck. Now it's controversial these days because it was written by a woman, and she's giving a white missionary woman, and she's writing a story from the standpoint of a male Chinese guy, right? Yeah. And so how can she really truly know? And I want to just vomit when people give that kind of criticism, but. But
we'll give you a barf bag, and we can talk about that later.
But it is a great book, okay? And one of the things that's great, and is illustrated in that story was because what Pearl S. Buck saw as a child in China was they would have, you're the rich guy, right? And you live in this big palace, and then one day when the famine sweeps through and the people aren't fed anymore, they riot, right? And when they riot, next thing you know, you're deposed, you're dead. Your old concubine's now living in the place by herself with the tumbleweeds, and all society's mixed up again. And there's always the danger that society breaks down. So, there's a joke, and people say, "Oh, people control society with sports games and news and this sort of thing." And maybe there's some truth to that, because when they don't control the masses or the people, and we get a little hungry or we get a little scared. We'll storm the palace gates, and it's been done throughout history. So there's always a danger. You may be Saddam Hussein, and you may be in a nice palace today, but 5 years from now, you might be living in a cave hiding from the Americans. And
I can tell you some stories about some friends from Zimbabwe who I met in college who, they were in the military and they fought in the revolution, and they would go to these farms where the white settlers were, and they had these underground what do you call them, like a bomb shelter.
Right.
And they would blow the lid off these bomb shelters and throw grenades down and kill the white settlers. I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah, the world's a harsh place. And so, like I say, there's nobody has exact control, but there's certainly, and that's my argument about these global connections. I mean, China and us are now tied financially at the hip. If we truly were to fight each other, somebody's going to have to take a big financial hit, right?
It would be them.
Right, they take the biggest one on the lip. And then we, of course, lose the imports and the exports, so we take a GDP hit as well. But, yeah, everybody loses. And so what the problem is, everybody loses has never been enough to prevent everybody from going there ultimately, right? Because that's not how people ultimately make their decisions. All right, guys, it's been great. I love this show. We're going to be back Sunday night from 6 to 9 p.m. I appreciate everyone who listens, and I appreciate you guys who call. And I just ask you guys to share this out there on Facebook and try to get us as many listeners as possible, maybe Twitter. Invite a friend, have a party. You guys can have a Carl Rominger party at your house. I'll send you a cardboard stand-up that you can set up in the room and take pictures with. It'd be great. But all seriousness aside, and we're going to keep talking about this stuff because I think it's an important discussion. And let's just watch and see whether I hope I'm dead wrong about World War III, obviously. But there's a lot going on in the world that we have to be concerned about. And the Hobby Lobby case is probably the least of our worries. But for some people, it's really just about poking Obama on the ACA, and I understand that. And Don, listen, I understand the ACA and I understand what it's all about, but it is going to be a big mess in 2015 when the businesses have to turn on their portion of it. And that's why they delayed it a year. And this thing is just a moving target, so we'll see what happens. But anyhow, thank you guys. Have a great night. And again, Sunday from, 6 to 9 p.m., 717-916-5189. Don't forget to check out carlrominger.com for all my goodies.